So again, welcome everybody who's joined us, who came to this conversation. I'm very honored to have my friend Doug with us here. Doug is a longtime activist, creator, actor, movie maker, really sort of a person who has championed the voice of creatives, LGBTQ plus creatives, Black creatives, people of color, you know, who really, Doug is really a person who has continuously, at least in my eyes, has championed the voice of those who are less heard, and also sort of a brave person who tells stories in all sorts of different mediums that, quite frankly, a lot of people, others do not have the balls to create. So, you know, I'm very honored for him to have him. And if you haven't checked his work on Noah's Ark, or more recently his movies, right? We'll talk about like Hot Guys with Guns, or From Zero to I Love You. Then you should definitely check it out. It's on Amazon now, right? I think they released it on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon, iTunes, Vudu, Vimeo on demand. Yeah, right. The second one, the first one's everywhere. So.
Right. So thank you, Doug. For those of you who don't meet, right, I'm Rabbi Iggy from the Tshuva Center, and we are doing this and sort of other conversations as part of our response to everything that's been going on, both in terms of recovery, which we'll talk, but also in terms of what's going on in the world, and all the other things that sort of are kind of like up-eviling our world, from COVID to, of course, sort of the conversations we have about race and LGBTQ plus issues. And here today, we're going to talk about intersectionality and how a lot of these things sort of kind of merge together. But I guess sort of just sort of really to sort of open it is that we are really, at least our version of what we could do, not just to not be racist or not be homophobic or not be, I don't know, sort of like against all the isms, is to engage, right? We believe that the opposite of addiction is connection, and therefore engagement and conversation is the only way that I know how to learn and how to grow and how to ask questions and how to not be afraid to maybe say the wrong thing and learn from it and be like, oh no, this is wrong. So I encourage all of us to do the same. And again, sort of thanks, Doug, for coming. First, I guess sort of I wanted to start first to talk about, right, today is a really good day for us, right? Today, right, the Supreme Court sort of has decided that, right, that sort of, I can't believe we still have to sort of discuss it, but like has decided that it is not okay, in fact, to fire somebody because they are gay, right? And not unanimously, right? Not unanimously, sort of some judges, Kavanaugh and Thomas, still think that it's okay, but all right, whatever. 9 versus 3, I'll take that. Thoughts, reactions? How did you feel about the whole thing today?
Well, personally, I was shocked. I was completely shocked, especially since, you know, they had to go back to the 1964 Civil Rights Act to pull a precedent for this. But, you know, given everything that's going on, and, you know, it's the same day, within 2 days that, you know, Donald Trump literally declares war on, you know, transgender people using bathrooms that they should be able to use. Do you know what I mean? But like, there was just like this, it just felt like this bright white light suddenly in the middle of all this darkness. And I was just really happy to see that. You know what I mean? And, you know, I thought, like, if it passed, I didn't think it was going to be that big of a margin. You know what I mean? I did not expect that to happen. So I'm really, I mean, I'm thrilled about it. I think it's really great. But like, there's, you know, that's like, we put out a fire. Now we have, you know, but, you know, the rest of the forest is burning. You know, we still, you know, like, we put out a couple of trees, some very important old growth trees, but the forest is still on fire. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're a little frozen. I don't know if
okay.
But yeah, but
Yeah,
to listen to you.
I got this message all of a sudden that my
That's
internet was
internet is like
unstable.
stable.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's okay. So am I. I mean,
Exactly. I always feel the same way. Like, oh, join the club. Everything's unstable here. But yeah,
yeah. Well, I'm just turning off things that might be
good.
using it, but but again, it's like the instability of the time that we live in is so traumatizing. Do you know what I mean? And first of all, let me just say thank you for being willing to have this conversation, and thank you for all the people, the 2 pages of people that showed up to participate and to hopefully participate in all of this. But like I grew up in DC in the 1960s, so this is like I'm used to this kind of thing. And in fact we moved to the suburbs of Maryland specifically because of the riots that happened after the death of Martin Luther King. And then I moved to LA 6 months after Rodney King was beat, and 6 months before the riots happened. So I've seen this kind of thing my entire life, but I've never seen it like this. I've never seen the kind of global and color-free engagement. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, like there were definitely white people who were engaged in the civil rights movement of the 1960s, but what I'm seeing now, especially from people, a generation and 2 generations younger than me, it's pretty amazing. But still, it's hard. Like, yeah, we're all unstable.
Are you hopeful? Like, I mean, I feel like something that, like, I look at the world and part of me feels like we said, like everything's on fire, right? Sort of the forest is on fire, everything's on fire, it's all going to burn down, right? So like nothing's going to be the same. And part of me feels like, oh, maybe we'll change. But I always recognize this sort of that, right? This sort of the world has always been kind to people who look like me. So, right. So I come from a space that is very secure, but I don't think that everybody comes from the same space.
Well, to answer the first part of that question, I would say yeah. And it was a week ago that suddenly it hit me because I went into a depression. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I went into like a really deep depression for about 5 days because it just felt like, because I couldn't see the image of George Floyd dying one more time. You know what I mean? I had to pull myself off of all of my social media. And, it's really hard that you constantly see people that look like me being, whether it's, like torn up by dogs or hit by police fire hoses, and then tasers, and then just like there was a video that happened there was a couple that there was some guys in a gray Mustang convertible that had the top down, and they hadn't made it home with curfew, and all these cops came out of nowhere and were just beating him. That's the same car I drive, same model, same year, same color. And I just thought, shit, I can't, I can't with all this. But what I started to have was I had started to have a lot of conversations over the course of a week with like straight white men who were calling me and asking me like, what do I do? What do I need to see? And then I saw people reading, and then I saw people actually watching 13 and like that, which is a very important documentary. And if you haven't seen it, you really should. It is Ava DuVernay's documentary on, what went wrong during Reconstruction and has led to our current, penal system. But I started to realize that it wasn't just Black people being angry and justifiably angry and hurt and tired, but it was like a whole generation of kids out there marching. You know what I mean? Like I live in a neighborhood in New Orleans where like everybody has a Black Lives Matter sign on the door. You know what I mean? Or in their front yard. And it's not, and I don't live in an entirely Black neighborhood. I live in a very integrated neighborhood. So yeah, but you said that you can inhabit a space, but Iggy, you have chosen to be proudly and prominently Jewish.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, there's no telling what could happen.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, if they come from me, they could just as easily decide once they've got all of us, they'll come for you guys.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's the thing that bothers me is that we have to. Nobody is safe. No woman is safe. You know what I mean? No person who is different is necessarily safe, because there could always be a backlash. But we have to keep going forward at the same time.
Right. Do you think that maybe that's why so many?
Did I freeze again?
You do, but your voice is still there. So, but you did freeze. I don't know if there's anything.
I must be running really slow, right?
Yeah.
Anyway.
As long as we can hear you, that's important.
Okay. Let me try to fix that.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm just trying to find a space closer to the router. Maybe that'll help. Is that any better?
No, now you're completely black. I mean, the screen.
Can you hear me now? Can you see me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Iggy?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Okay, well, I've just turned the camera off and then I turned it back on. Okay, yeah, I know, I got it. So I'm still here, trust me. So I'm just trying to figure it out.
Right.
My camera is turned on, by the way. Can you hear me? Can you still
I can hear you, but we can't see you at the moment. So I don't know if you want to.
Shit. Can you still hear me?
You can still hear you.
Okay, hold on. Let me try something. I'll be right back.
Okay. Sorry, everyone. Just like just one interruption. I don't know if anybody has.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Oh, here, right. If anybody has comments or questions in the meantime, while Doug is getting. Oh, here you are.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh yeah, Rosalind. Yes.
Yes. I'm just wondering, I was thinking about this a few days ago when a lot of this stuff happened and I heard you on Saturday morning. A lot of the police come from being MPs in the armed services where they're fighting a war against whomever it happens to be. Do you think that they have automatically in their heads that they're still fighting a war, so if somebody looks different than them, they're after them? Psychologically.
The truth is, I would say yes. So I served in the military, right? And so, I have some experience with being in the military. And yes, it takes a long time, if at all, to not look at all the different people who might be threats to you. And those are people who don't look like you, right?
Right.
And I can tell you still to this day.
Xenophobia, right? Yeah.
It's not just xenophobia. Like to this day, if I walk into a room that I don't know, the first thing I look for is the exits, right? And who stands by the exits, and what's the pattern there, and who in the room I can immediately sort of like recognize that I can trust or not. And it's instinctual. It takes like 5 seconds. It's not even something I'm aware of until it's happening. But I think that I think a lot of people come into all sorts of different people who come out of the army are really drilled into sort of like dividing the world into foe and friend. And friend usually is people who look like me, dress like me, talk like me, feel like me. And foe is everybody else.
But Iggy.
Yeah.
But it's different. The Israeli military is different. First of all, it's a homogenous society. Everybody basically in the military is Jewish, right? So you all have the same, and everybody in that particular military has the same mindset, the same goal, and has the same thing. The U.S. military is still made up of Americans.
Yes and no. Okay, so first of all, Doug, do you want to call to the Zoom meeting from your cell phone? I think that will help. Sorry again. I apologize, guys, for the technical difficulty. We will resolve it momentarily. I don't know if there's any other questions or comments in the meantime. You can engage in.
Hey, is that better?
Oh, way better.
Okay, cool. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. Just turn the phone on the side so we can see you not on the side. Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
Perfect. Much better. Look at that face. So
what I was saying was about the
yeah, go on.
Go on. I was just going to say about, the question about the military.
Right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the difference between, like, were you in the Belgian military or the Israeli military?
Israeli military. Okay.
Well, the difference being is that the Israeli military comes from a central purpose. I mean, I would assume everybody's Jewish. Maybe
the majority, not everybody, but the majority.
The majority are Jewish, and the majority are there to protect Israel, right? A lot of the U.S. Army is still made up of Americans from all over the place. Right. You know what I mean? And they bring their prejudices and their fears and their hates with them. Right. And instead of being a cohesive unit of all people who are just supposed to be protecting the interests of the United States, they form little subcategories. Do you know what I mean? So it's to her question about do they think that they're warriors, and also to your answer about, they do separate everything from between us and them, but they do that within their own units.
Yeah, but I'm saying, I think that if it's true for us, it's almost all, I'm sure, true even for the American, right? So like if it's true for us who's far more homogenized, I can only imagine what it is for sort of like people think. But as we were saying before, we're talking about sort of like, a lot of people who are sort of joining in the cause, if you will. I mean, I thought that's an interesting point. Like, do you think that somewhere in the subconscious is this space where like people feel like, oh, if I champion this because like otherwise they will come for me afterwards, for the women, for the Jews, for the queers, for the like sort of like kind of Martin Niemöller, sort of like, as he was writing, that there will be nobody speaking for them, that there's a self-preservation element in this as well, you think?
I'm sure on some level there's got to be. I mean, I think we only survive as a coalition. You know what I mean? If we don't all march together, yeah, they could turn on us individually and break us down. But I think there's something bigger here. It just feels like there's something bigger here because a lot of the people that I see marching are in their 20s and teens. Like my godson's 18 and he and his 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old friends are marching. And they're doing it because they feel impassioned and they feel like it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And that's the thing that gave me hope. You know what I mean? It's not because it's not like, it's not trendy, it's right.
Right. Right. Do you find, I mean, I guess because we're talking about intersectionality, right? Do you find, so like, I don't know, like where do you find your voice sort of like within the spectrum of Black Lives Matter, right? So like trans lives matter, LGBTQ plus sort of issues, sort of like where does intersectionality come for you as a person and as an activist and as a creator in this?
Well, as a creator, I have to see what's going on and then I have to record it and then I have to turn it into some kind of story. You know what I mean? I think the artists are the ones that record what goes on and translate it so that it's understandable for the future and for those who weren't necessarily direct witnesses, but we can make it visceral in some way. So I'm still trying, like I'm a lot of my stuff has to do with interracial couples.
Right.
And both of my films have interracial couples and gay couples. And I did that intentionally. And it was because I see a lot of times that in the movies, in the sort of queer cinema, as sort of an overall catch-all for that, still take place in like an all-female universe or an all-male universe or an all-white male universe or an all-Asian space or an all-black. And I thought, if I integrate the screen, I'll integrate the theater. If I integrate the theater, I'll integrate the lobby, and then people will start to talk, and they'll see each other, and then there's always got to be some goal for me of understanding, of getting people to understand and feel something that they didn't before, and hopefully open themselves up, and then also give them a space to reveal something. And, you know, as a, you know, I always say, I refer to myself as a Black gay man, because to me, gay isn't always apparent, but Black, when I walk in the room, there's a Black man in the room. So I'm always going to, you know, just like you were talking about looking for the exits, I always count the Black people in the room, wherever I am. So I mean, I'm trying to figure out a story about all of this, but right now, a lot of what I'm doing is just trying to absorb and process, you know, 57 years of trauma of being Black in America, and then trying to figure out, how do I still hold the space to make something that'll go forward? How do I encourage people? How do I encourage the conversation? And, you know, just like you, I've always lived my life really openly, because I never wanted anybody to have a stick that they could hit me with. Like, I never wanted somebody to be able to say, well, did you know that Doug Spearman was gay? Well, like, yeah, Doug Spearman's gay. That's not a thing. It's clear that I'm Black. It's clear that I'm gay. And it's clear that this is part of my life's work. And, you know, on the activism side, like, I have a responsibility. Like, you know what the talk is, don't you, Iggy?
Yes.
Like, the world knows what the talk is, because it's been published now, I believe, in the New York Times. And it's a real conversation where we're told that you might be the, you know, like, you not only, like, the way mine went was like, I was not only going to be the representation, the representative of my family, but also of my race. And that I might be the first and only Black person somebody meets, and that I was also going to have to work better, harder, and faster, just to be proven to be not 4/5 of a human being, but a whole human being. And I've given that talk to my cousins and my nieces, and I'm, you know, I just don't want to have to give that talk anymore. Do you know what I mean? But I want to be able to say something without having to arm the next generation against white people. Does that make sense?
No, it does. So how would you change the talk? Do you think that the talk is necessary, in the sense of, like, right, for whoever, right? Because we all have a version of it, right? We have there's the Jewish version of it, or right? So, like,
is there?
Yeah, of course, right? So, like, right, people hate you, blah blah blah. Especially if you grew up in right. I grew up with a Holocaust surviving grandparents who pretty much raised me, right? So, right, there's always a version of it, in sort of like, this is what you're supposed to be, this is what you're supposed to do, right? And I think in many ways, to be entirely honest, I think at least for Jews, right, or for gay people, this intersectionality excuses them in terms of a lot of the sort of the race stuff. Right? So, like, right?
Well, I think it's just because nobody's ever had the conversation. I'm going to ask a question, and if it sounds, so I will tell you, a lot of what happened, a lot of what put me in the space that I'm in was because NBC did a miniseries called The Holocaust when I was in high school. And it was amazing. And I had never heard of the Holocaust until I was in high school. And I saw how these people, and it starts way before, you know, it starts way before the war. And I saw how these people who had strong and secure places in German society had it all ripped apart and then were killed. And I learned a lot from that. I mean, I'll never forget, that was the winter of 1977. I'll never forget that. And, you know, in a lot of ways, because of the end of the war, not that anti-Semitism is not as violent or as viral as it is, but in a lot of ways, the bulk of the murdering of Jews and the displacement of them from a society ended at the end of World War II. Is it okay for me to say that?
Yeah. I think that as a bulk, I think that's true.
But as a Black person, it has never ended. And when I look at what, like, when you know, like the Holocaust, it's, you know, the Holocaust for us in our way has never ended. And I think what's happening now is something that's going to hopefully drive a stake into that. You know what I mean? So like, I don't want to have to, you know, like I have a cousin who has a 2-year-old son. And, you know, my cousin and I were talking, and I said, are you going out and protest? He says, like, no, I've got to stay home. I have to protect my son. You know what I mean? Like, he's not going to march because he has to raise a black child. You know, he wants to be around to raise a black child. So, like, how we are affects as black men, and not just gay men, but just as black men, in order to look at, we have to preserve ourselves, which changes the way we speak to authority, the way we speak in public, the way we act in public. Like, I was trying to tell my godsons when I was this week that I am conscious of where I put my phone and where I put my wallet every time I get in the car, and how I put my hands on the wheel, because I don't know what's going to happen if I get pulled over. You know what I mean? I've even been practiced hitting Facebook Live, you know, on the dashboard. Do you know what I mean? Like, I have to be, you know, so conscious all the time of my physical actions in public spaces, because, you know, am I going to make somebody uncomfortable? I mean, you know, is there going to be somebody who's going to call the cops on me? What happens if I get pulled over? Do you know what I mean? And we all have a voice that we use for white cops. You know what I mean? And I don't want to.
Absolutely. No, it's funny. I think, right, you're right. I think the bulk in terms of Judaism, although I think, right, there are moments like in Pittsburgh, all of a sudden we feel like, oh, here we go, right? Here we go again, right? This is coming again for us, right? And we sort of like kind of all the trauma comes again. But I also think that sort of there's a certain, if I'm honest, a certain space both for gay and for Jews to say like, right, oh, don't tell me about suffering. I will tell you about suffering, right? Like, right, oh, don't tell me about, like, you know, black men being killed in America. Do you know how many Jews have been killed? Like, sort of like, I think that there's a lot of, and I also hear it from gay men, right? Or, you know, mostly because that's sort of most of the people around me in that sense, to sort of say like, oh, don't talk to me about privilege, right? I have, you know, so-and-so, and like, I'm a gay person, right?
Yeah, but no, go on, finish your thought.
No, it's like it's hard because, right, we were sort of pre-talking about this, right? One of the moments that were the very traumatizing for me as a parent, right? Both my kids are adopted, right? They're both Asian children. And when the whole COVID thing was happening, right, my daughter was on the subway and somebody spat in her face, right? So like because of COVID, right? And in that sense, right, sort of like this, that every time we feel trauma, or every time I feel sort of like, it's like talking about your friend with the son, every time I feel the parent protective of my own trauma, it can, if I'm not careful, separate me, right? Sort of create distance between me and the plight, let's say, of sort of like equality and justice and whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Because then I have to focus on my own, or at least sort of my own plight, be like, oh, now I get it for me, right?
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I was on the board of Equality California for 6 years, all through the Prop 8 situation. And I was luckily on the board when it started, and I was luckily on the board still when marriage was finally passed in the United States. It's certainly in California. But I had to constantly be the black guy who had to remind them that, first of all, and I've also been sort of an adjunct voice for the HRC, and they let me see a white paper that they were doing about race in America and in the gay community, and they completely got it wrong, because they think that the gay community, or there are a lot of times when gays think that the gay community is a unified force in the United States, just the way they think black people are, you know, like we're this omni group, you know, like we have one mind, one thought, one experience, and we don't. And I had to remind them, just like I said about the military, that this is America, and we are raised by Americans with their prejudices and their beliefs and their fears and whatever acceptance you were brought into. So you cannot take race out of any conversation in this country, and in race and religion. You know what I mean? Like you really can't.
Speaking of religion, so like what we're talking about, like, right, so like training your finger, right? Siri, put on Facebook Live now, right? Sort of like, but
Yeah.
so what, right? You talk about sort of some of the things you do in the car, like what, kind of shifting gears a little bit, like what do you do to see the hope? What do you do for yourself to sort of to not go into this constant space of PTSD, right? Do you have things that you say to yourself, read to yourself, like things that you exercise, be like, okay, I also need to be a person, right? And then we have a question from Jeremy.
Well, you know, like what we haven't talked about, and I don't mind disclosing, is that I'm sober.
Right.
You know, I'm 19 years sober, and I've done the steps multiple times, and I've taken people through the steps, and I have to ground myself in this fact that I have a spiritual program that has spiritual solutions to real world problems. So if I turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand God, you know, and if I believe in a power greater than myself, then that gives me just a little bit of something to hold on to. And then I just have to go and do what I was taught in the talk. And I have to be friendly. I have to be nice. I have to be visible. I have to be open, and I have to be, I have to listen to the stupid comments and answer the stupid questions sometimes, but I have to do that. Do you know what I mean? And I have to just make friends, you know, and I have to actually just, I can't retreat, even when I want to retreat, when I want to hole up in the house. And and it's been really difficult, especially because COVID, you know, the COVID quarantine on top of all of this. And because I'm 57 years old and I'm Black, I don't have any pre-existing conditions that would sort of make me more of a target for COVID, but I still have to be very present about that. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But I can't, and as an artist, I do not have the luxury of withdrawing from the world. I have to be engaged.
Interesting. So you see that as a responsibility in that sense, right?
Yeah, because, you know, like, well, you remember my ex, John. Whenever John, I had a white boyfriend, a fiance, and whenever John and I would hold hands in public, it was a political statement.
Right.
For him, it was just holding hands, but for me, it was political. And because I was born in the middle of the last century, and because I've lived through what I've lived through, I know that as a Black gay man, I'm still political. Like, my very existence is political.
Right. I want to go back to, we have a question, but I want to go back to in a second, like to think about, like, because I love this idea, right? So, like, because this is part of what we're trying to say is like the recovery, right, can teach all of us so many lessons, right? So that, right, so like almost like, but there should be like a 12 steps now for people, right? 12 steps for Black people, 12 steps for Black people who are gay, 12 steps for white people, right? So like there should be this sort of, right, which we constantly say that there's so many lessons in recovery, and you don't have to be an addict to be in recovery. Right?
No, you don't.
Right? That those spaces are really important.
Yeah. Well, one of the biggest things that I've learned in recovery is to respond rather than react. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? You know, like there's, and also there's a line in the book that says that justifiable anger is the dubious luxury of normal men. Do you know what I mean? So like, and the word dubious is very important there, because it's like, it's not even okay for all of them. You know what I mean? For normal people. So I
don't know what normal is.
Yeah. Well, I had a kid tell me once that normal was the common denominator of your own experience, which I loved.
I have to think about that. That's deep.
Yeah.
Say that again. Normal is the common denominator
of your own experience.
Of your own experience. Yeah, although that changes all the time. So if I talk about unstable, right? So like that's so like, you know, yeah. All right, Jeremy had a question. Jeremy?
Nah, I just thank you, first of all, you know, because I do believe like it's going to take a lot of us speaking out and having uncomfortable conversations, being willing to lose friends or what we thought were friends in this. And then like the other piece is just like being able to find the hope in it. And this is where I just get like stuck in knowing that like my responsibility is to speak up, but it gets hard because I mean, most of the conversations I've been having, and definitely uncomfortable. Like it falls back to like, oh well, look where we're at 60 years ago is different than where we're at today. And it's like I just having two small children, I hope there's direction in this. You know, that's my piece with it, is that I hope that there's a lot of direction in this movement of like just equality. Because again, it's like there's days that I get stuck, lost having again, like mine is I have biracial children, growing up biracial in a place where looking for similarities was difficult at all times. And it's again, it's just like my comments really, I appreciate you focusing on like the younger generation, because that's where I think the keys to this is. You know, I just can't, I will not be able to deal with like another form of evolved racism and the swing and the pendulum that's like constantly happened since the start of this, like really since the start of this country. And that's why like it's really important to put your eyes and look at the documentaries like 13th, and then you'll understand like really like policing and laws and the systematic pieces of this that are deeply ingrained, you know. So again, I appreciate these things are important. That's really what I wanted to add to it. And kind of outside of like the spiritual principles, like what has been helping you, or what have you been hearing inside like the Black community with hope, or is it mixed match? Because that's the piece that I struggle with, is on both sides of the community. I'm hearing like, you know, you got people that were big activists and they just kind of are tired now, and that's what I'm worried about, is that do we just get complacent and tired again, or is the world movement enough to really see the change that's necessary?
Can I answer that, Iggy?
Yeah, of course.
So Jeremy, first of all, thanks for the question. And you know, having children, yeah, but you know, this actually came up at Christmas with my family at the Christmas dinner table, and what we were talking about was the fact that so many white people were so focused on Trump that we could actually take the time to like heal ourselves. And I think what a lot of people are feeling, and like in the groups that I'm talking to, like my friends, is everybody's tired. We're exhausted. And I feel like the analogy that I get is that like we are taking care of our wounded right now, like the older ones. Do you know what I mean? Like the old, you know, like people like 40 and up. We're taking care of our wounded. We're like, the young ones go out there and march and do all of that stuff, because in the end, it's going to be, you know, the 30s and the 20s, the teens that are going to have to join the police force, that are going to have to run for office, that are going to have to make the systemic change that really needs to happen. And hopefully they can do that and not lose their way or their principles. But I think a lot of people have hope, because we've never, you know, at least my friends, we haven't seen this much engagement from white people in this process before, not in our lifetimes. And I know that like right before this, I was on a call, like I was on a Zoom, because even in the recovery community, like I got sobered in LA, and I live in New Orleans now. I'm definitely sometimes the only Black guy in the white space still. So a lot of us a bunch of us got together and said, hey, we need just a place to talk about this, where we can just talk freely and how it impacts our recovery. And a lot of people, we're talking about the fact that we have hope. There is some hope for change, but you know, we'll see, you know, like history will let us know how we did with all of this. But I really appreciate, and I understand the fear and the exhaustion and all of that that's happening because of this.
Yeah. I mean,
I think my biggest thing comes back to is just like, all right, we put it on the backs of our young, just the way they did in the 60s, and like without the guidance of real like mentors and the people that are like kind of died out in this, or the ones that are kind of like, all right, like how do you change the mission statement of America when it's the Constitution has been written to look at us and as certain marginalized people. So that like that always comes back to my worry with this thing, is like I hope the guidance continues to be there, and it looks like it is when we have like voices like yours, and this is. I mean, I fall back to the big ones on the social justice, the Brian Stevensons and them, and falling back on some of their talks is like they see the mass change, and that's the piece that I get scared of, you know, I worry about. And constantly.
Jeremy, I'm a big believer that the only way, like, I'm not by nature a protester. I'm by nature a get in guy.
Yeah.
Like, I think the only way to change the machine, and because I was raised in DC, and I was raised by people who worked in the government, and I worked on Capitol Hill. And I believe that the only way to really do this is to get in, to change the system, is to get in the system. So like, you have to join a board. You know what I mean? Like, you have to join an organization. I mean, start talking to your neighbors, but people have to run for office. They have to take jobs. They have to make it something which is why which is why I was in corporate America on networks for a while. But like, you know, I learned pretty early on that if you want real and lasting change, you have to stand up for it, and you have to be willing to roll up your sleeves and get in there and like run a campaign. You know what I mean? You sit on a board, you know, do boring shit, you know, sign up to work find a candidate that you like, and then be so indispensable that they take you with them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. It definitely does. And that's the piece for the guidance and like pushing like my children and trying to just prepare them, because like, again, like when you look back at race and you look back at education, look back at differences, like I constantly see the disparities, but then you got corporate America saying like, hey, we stand with Black lives. Like, I'll give $100 million. Like, I know what $100 million would do in the neighborhood I live right now. So that's again, like, I'm just hoping to see a lot more of these pieces instead of like the politicized piece of all this shit. And that's where I get like, it's time to heal. Like that's real.
Yeah. Jeremy, I'm getting those emails too. And you know what I do? I find the person that wrote that email and I write them back. And I'm like, that's really great, but what are you really going to do? And what can you do on the ground? You got to hold their feet to the fire. You're not going to just make me buy another product because suddenly you decided that Black Lives Matter. You're going to you're down with the movement. But no, I don't want that. I want to see what you're going to do. And I don't need an apology. I need some progress.
Action. Action.
Yeah, it always comes back. It always comes back to action. It always comes back to taking thing. I love this idea, Doug, of like, finding a board, find a person, support that. I think that's really important. And just, I would say that you are get in there, but you are a little bit of a protester as well. Like, right, your movies, your work, your art, sort of like stands on its own. So you may not be marching on the street, but like the movies are marching a little bit for you in that sense. And I think a combination of all these things for all of us is what's needed for us, right? Just sort of to decide that we have to do something, right? And I feel the same way in many ways about sort of like, we started the conversation about, right, sort of the Supreme Court. And just before, right, I was saying like how, like almost in a cynical tone, like, oh, right, so like, oh, you've decided that firing because I'm gay is not okay? Oh, thanks, that 2020, thanks, that's, like, it's great, but like really, that, like, I feel that we should have gone there a long time ago. And both the relief that I felt today from this, but also, and this is where, right back to James Baldwin, one of my favorites, right? Sort of that I, the disbelief, right? The sort of that like I almost didn't believe it, right? I had to check multiple sources that this is true, right? Because like somehow, right, I don't deserve this. This is not my world. Our world is not to be, right, so like, sort of supported by the Supreme Court and these people there, and how I too have swallowed the filth, not the same way as the race, but sort of like, right, to think that I don't deserve anything else, right? And I will say this, I've said this before, that in my lifetime, I've never thought I'll see gay marriage. I never thought that will happen in my lifetime.
Yeah, I never thought I'd see a Black president. But I want to call attention to something that I don't personally believe I can afford, and that's cynicism. Because I hear all the time, mostly from white people, it's 2020, it's 2019, it's 2018. How can this still be going on? Read American history book, textbook from a class in a public school in America, and you would be shocked at the history, the way it's taught. Do you know what I mean? And of course, we're still living under statues and under peace. You know, really.
You're getting cut off, Doug. Doug, you're getting cut off.
Do you know what I mean? Like people, like everything kind of. Huh?
You got cut off. Sorry. Can you repeat yourself?
Crap. Okay. I'm not muted. I don't think I'm muted.
No. I said you got cut off. So just if you say it again.
Okay. What I was saying is that if you really want to, you know, like it's not people, especially white people, are very surprised that we live in an age when something like this hasn't happened or could happen. But I'm sure there were, you know, like, do you remember the Holocaust Museum in LA?
Yes.
Do you remember that diorama of the cafe in Berlin in 1927? And there were some nice Jews reading a paper going, oh, look, guy Hitler was elected.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Fair and square, he was elected.
Well, you know, just think about it.
Yeah.
You know, like we're all human beings constantly surprised me. Do you know what I mean? Like we think that we've reached some pinnacle of human society, but no, clearly we haven't.
Right.
You know what I mean? We just haven't evolved past so much us-them violence.
Right. Right. Moshe, you had a question. Unmute yourself, Moshe. There you go. Yes.
Hey, Doug. Thank you for joining our group here tonight. You've been quite interesting, I gotta say. I'm one of those guys who like listen to people and also like I pick out something he said and then I want to go with it. There was a comparison that you made between the Black people and Jews with regards to the end of slavery and the end of the Holocaust. Actually, we were slaves too.
I know.
And right. And just like slavery never ended and the abuse from that slavery never ended, the Holocaust was just like, whatever, there's just like more of it. And I just wondering, why is it that all of us here on our little Hollywood Square Zoom meeting over here, why any of us feel different from each other? I personally don't think there's a difference between Blacks, Jews, gays, lesbians, the whole LGBTQ. Anyone who's put down and separated from humanity, I think we're all the same and we're all just dealing with it in a different way. I just want to know if you can clearly state that you feel that just like when slavery ended is the same thing, that it really never ended. You know, you've been persecuted, I've been persecuted, Iggy's been persecuted. You know, I want to know if you feel that there's inequality within the persecution spectrum, white, black, brown. There was a jokester on the internet that it was kind of pretty funny, and he said that, by the way, Moshe, you're not white, you know, you're almond. Like I couldn't go to a white fascist group and say, yo, dude, I want to join. They'll say, no, you can join. You're not really white, you know, like you're almond, you're not milk. Yes, you are white, and yes, we can put you in the cereal, but it's not really the same thing. I want to hear from you. I know what Iggy's gonna say. I want to hear. I want to hear from the Black man.
Oh, you singled me out, the Black guy.
Yeah.
So, do I think there's I think suffering is suffering, and I think being victimized is something a lot of groups share. So yeah, there's I don't know if it's equality, because I mean, because everybody's pain is relevant and relative to them. I hope that makes sense. But I do believe there is a common ground in all of this. I mean, I think what happens to Jews, what happens to women, what happens to Black people, what happens to Asian people in this country, there's a certain commonality of being forced aside, being ghettoized, whether it's literally being forced into a geographic area, or whether it's being denied certain circumstances because certain rights like healthcare or decent education, or just the, you know, being able to buy a house in a certain neighborhood. Like I lived in a neighborhood, Iggy lived in a neighborhood in LA where Jews and Catholics weren't allowed to buy houses. And when the charter for that neighborhood was first made. So I believe,
them, didn't I?
Yeah, you did. You know, Beverly Hills was founded because Jews weren't allowed to live in Hancock Park. Right. So Moshe, I don't know if I have if the word equality in that, but common ground and common purpose are very important to me, because I believe in groups. I believe in people coming together to make change, and I really believe that there's a you know, that we have coalition. You know what I mean? You know, there was always there used to be a lot of talk about the important bond between the Black community and the Jewish community, because they've both been through so much and for so very long. And I still think that's important, and I still think those ties are important, because we are, in a sense, always somehow outside of the U.S. population. We're never completely absorbed or completely ingrained. And even though Jews and Black people have been in this country, you know, for over 400 years, you know, but we're still somehow slightly removed from the American system. So in order to create an America that's inclusive of us, I believe we all have to join arms and do it together again. Does that make sense? No,
it makes perfect sense, Doug. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think that's exactly that. I think for us, and for me in Coalition, and in many ways, that's why we're doing this, right? To find the common ground, to find the space that we can share a common language. We have a few minutes. Tell us a little bit, Doug, about I don't know, like things that you're working on, things that you know, are important to you right now, kind of like what's, you know, in terms of the art, and right, I promised a little bit of tinsel, right? A little bit of our Hollywood life, right? Doug and I have a lot of adventures in Hollywood, a lot of stories that are for the after show. But what are you working on? What's fascinating you right now? Do you have a
Well, believe it or not, right before, so I moved to New Orleans, you know, right in the middle of Mardi Gras. And this is going to sound terrible. Well, I hope it makes sense. So I'm working on a screenplay that I came up with the idea for probably about watching the Oscars. And it's called Third Slave from the Left. And yeah, I know, it either makes people very uncomfortable. And what I've noticed is that when you see these large scale slave epics, you know, they're usually the lead actor or actress they're always a British African. They're never American. Even Selma was, you know, Martin Luther King wasn't played by an American Black, he was played by a Brit. And so I wrote this story to like sort of poke holes in this whole idea of making a movie just to get an Oscar, like now, because women are so much at the forefront and being pushed by Hollywood to lead projects. So this movie's led by a white woman. It has a white male star who's got the clout to get it made. The lead actors are both Black Africans, but there's this one guy who lives in this town, and all he does is like he plays slave background, and his mother hates it. His a former Black Panther. And so it's trying to figure out, like, I like to take things and like just sort of rip holes in them and go, okay, that's not real. So I really am turning my eye on Hollywood, especially how it depicts Black people and the importance of the slave narrative and how little it has to do with actually involving Black people from this country.
Right. Fascinating. I like that. A little glimpse into the future of the next Oscar. Right?
Yeah. If I got an Oscar for poking fun at movies that try to make Oscars, that would be ironic on so many levels.
And I think, right, so Hollywood, right? So like, right, yeah. I don't know if there's one more if there's a comment or short comment or question, but we're just about wrapping time. I don't know. Well, if not, I'll just say, I say again, thank you to Doug and sort of like right to this conversation. And I invite everybody who's listening in general to be part of this conversation, right? You can email us, you can DM us, whatever, and to continue conversations like this, sort of like whether with us or in general. I do believe, and I'll repeat what I said before, that sort of the only way I know how to engage in things that are difficult is talking. And right, so like I'm very fortunate to have friends like Doug who are willing to sort of be kind of brave on camera and sort of things, but it doesn't have to be that, right? It could be just a person next to you on the street or whatever, and just as you said, right, you have to make friends. I like that in the talk, just making the friends, making things. Again, you can listen to us on the podcast, Tattoos and Torah. You can find us on Instagram, right? The Tshuva Center and Doug Spearman on both on Instagram and on Facebook. Right, so we have groups that we lead constantly, right? Tshuva group on Thursdays, Not My Corona on Wednesdays, and other sort of like recovery groups as well. So check us out at Tshuva Center. Check Doug's work. If you haven't seen the movies, you have to. Right, Hot Guys with Guns, which I read somewhere that if you had to do it again, you would not name it like that, right? You would.
No, I wouldn't, because like all of this, the movie came out at a time when gun violence in schools was really like just overwhelming, and like my whole stance on like having a gun as part of entertainment has really changed. So I'm,
What would you call it now? Just Hot Guys.
Know.
Just Hot Guys. Hot Guys with flowers.
The Purple Mafia.
And right, Hot Guys with water guns.
But
so, yeah.
These conversations are super important, and we create change when we create these spaces to have these conversations. So I'm very honored and very, very grateful to have been able to give them this platform and the chance to engage with everybody. So thank you very much for that.
Absolutely, thank you, and thank you everybody. We'll see you soon. This will go on YouTube as well, so people can check it out later. And then Doug, I'll talk to you soon. If you find me somebody for tomorrow, that'd be awesome.
All right, I'm going to get on that right now.
Cool. All right. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.